grossest podcast in the Welt.
Yeah.
It's the extent of my German. I have no idea what that means.
Word up to all our listeners and viewers worldwide, and welcome to another delicious entree of cerebral nutrition. Here to serve you some food for thought is myself, Christopher Driver, and with me once again is the maitre d' du jour, Monsieur Jordan Roy.
Bonjour.
Today, Jordan's going to take us through some of the commonplace misconceptions many of us carry from lifetime of exposure to entertainment and media influence. The effects of sensationalized everything will necessarily take some toll on the psyche, so today we'll examine some of the ways that our thought patterns are affecting our belief structures and how those may have been influenced by the media we consume on a regular basis. So with that, I'll let Jordan take the reins and see where he's got to start us off with.
Yeah, so you actually kind of mentioned something there that I thought that I'm going to have to tack on another 15 minutes to the end of this to talk about, but mostly the impetus to this episode is going to be essentially like life's not like the movies. If you've been watching for a while, you know that I am one of my hobbies is shooting. So a lot of what happens when I'm at the range is completely different than anything you'll see in the movies. You know, have you ever fired two guns while it's flying through the air kind of thing? That just doesn't happen. And expecting to hit anything is kind of ridiculous. And I get a lot of this from my students who really, there's no reason why they should know anything about this. A lot of them are young. Why didn't they just shoot them? Well, they're peasants. They have never held a rifle before or a musket before, so it's a lot harder to use. It kicks you in the shoulder quite hard, and so there's a lot of this reality that we don't understand, a little minutia about reality that we just miss because we've seen it in a movie once. But it's not just about guns. Today's not about guns or anything related to that, really. It's about our perception of what we expect reality to be like. Like in the conflict episode where I talked about, with our special guest. Go check it out. He was a great guest. But he was talking that people have conflicts in their lives because they don't have their conception of reality doesn't align with the way reality actually is. So this happened in the workplace where they'll say something like, "Oh, why doesn't my boss, think of me, blah, blah, blah," and they have expectations for themselves which don't align to reality. I often will call this in our podcast the logos, where this is essentially what I mean when I say, follow the logos or follow the Tao, which I keep bringing up over and over again. You guys are probably sick of it. If I have any following, this is the memes you're going to be making. But it also comes up in this disconnect from reality happens in two others that I can see, in two other genres that I can see in that. That is the fields of medicine and law, especially. Medicine, we have medicine shows. We also have cop shows and Law and Order and stuff like that, where we have this expectation of what the law is. And then we have the reality of what the law is. The law is extremely boring. You can't really make, if you've seen anyone dissect the law, there's a couple good YouTube channels about Canadian law, especially, one of which I've been watching, and it's not interesting. It's interesting, but it's not entertaining stuff. It's kind of boring, but it's interesting in the way that I now understand the law a bit better. Medicine, on the other hand, is not like in the movies. Again, you get stuff like, in the movies where they're all running around with their heads cut off going, "Well, there's somebody with a broken leg. Oh no, what are we going to do?" And it's just like patient three's got a broken leg and they have to remain calm, because if they don't remain calm, well, the patient starts going. And then if they don't, and if
it can worsen their condition,
it can worsen their condition. Plus the nurses and the doctors could get flustered if they raise their own heart rate too much. If they, you start hyperventilating, you can put yourself in a panic state without actually being in any form of panic. And so medicine is one of these places where the act of medicine is a lot different from the portrayal of medicine. Another one that's a lot more like this is you see airplane movies where they, people are like, oh no, we're going to hit the ground. Oh no, we're going to crash, blah, blah, blah. But pilots especially are trained. You can see this when you read the books about Tom Wolfe's The Right Stuff, where he talks about pilots of the space program and what they were looking for, and how, Chuck Yeager's voice became the voice of all airline pilots because he had this calm, cool, collected voice. And it was so calm. Just to let you know that we have lost 2 wings and are flying directly at the ground. Please, this calm voice, because no matter what is happening, you have to remain calm, because, you call down to a ground crew, you are calm, you say exactly what's happening. The ground crew's like, okay, do this, and you might get out of it. And if they panic, the message isn't going to get across. Nothing's going to happen. So the movie, and this is kind of where I'm coming at here, the overriding theme here is that the medium is the message, again, with Marshall McLuhan. So I guess the thesis of this whole thing that we're gonna talk about today is that when you're trying to make something for entertainment, you rely on certain things, you rely on certain actions, you rely on things to build the tension, to create a mood, to create an atmosphere that don't exist in the same way that they would in reality. And
it's for dramatic effect, right? They're not doing anything sinister or trying to mislead people or anything like that. It's just for the sake of entertainment to make the movie more enjoyable.
No, and maybe they are trying to mislead someone so that in 5 minutes they can be like, oh, you thought I meant this, which is perfectly okay. And I'm not arguing that we should have completely realistic movies. Oh, right. Hell no. I want
over the top.
Sometimes I want over the top. It's like, why were there only 6 rounds in that guy's revolver? He should just be, because it's not that kind of movie. And, if it is that kind of movie, then I'm going to want, if I'm watching Band of Brothers and the guy starts shooting 10 rounds out of his M1 Garand, I'm going to be like, oh, come on. Come on. He's got the ping's out and you got to reload. So I want realism from something like that. But if it's a cartoon, or if it's like Star Trek or something,
or shoot 'em up,
yeah, then
that was a fantastic over the top movie, like Die Hard and stuff like that.
I bring shoot 'em up every once in a while because it was absolutely the epitome of WTF.
But it's fun. It's so much fun to watch stuff like that because it's just crazy.
Yeah,
it's silly.
You wouldn't throw headphones on a baby listening to metal. That's bad for the baby's early hearing.
Metal is bad for everybody.
Oh, we should have my brother-in-law on to talk about metal. Anyway, but what we get is that when we watched, and a lot of people, we do watch a lot of TV. Even I watch a lot of TV.
Even you?
Even me. No, I'm not one of those purists to say don't. Well, yeah, technically. But I'm not one of those purists to say that we shouldn't even watch either. And this is not the solution to this, because media, again, I'm not saying that to make sure that we don't get, and this is those all or nothing people, to make sure that we don't have this disconnect of I completely didn't finish the thesis of my point. We'll get back. No, that was me. Okay. So the medium is the message, and we have this disconnect. And so the thing that we want to realize is that when we have this disconnect and we keep seeing this reality, we have expectations of reality that don't match up with what we've been shown that they are. We're educating ourselves a lot of times with these things, and we have to realize that there's a difference between the world and the other. Now, you brought up in the intro that we're kind of, how do I say this? Programming ourselves with this to some extent. And we have to realize that that's happening. Facebook does this, and they're aware of the fact that they're doing this. One of the Facebook founders a couple of years ago, I think it was like 4 or 5 years ago, came up and had an interview where he's like, don't go on Facebook. This is what it's doing to your brain. And this was pretty... He left
and started some like encrypted messaging app.
Yeah.
Too. Like he was really upset with the way Facebook went about it.
Yeah. And I think I even shared it on my Facebook, ironically, but I thought it was really interesting. And I'm not one, if you go on my Facebook, and you can go on if you want, I guess. A lot of you are on my Facebook. If you're seeing this, you got it from my Facebook, is a 30% chance. But I don't really put my face on there very often. My main face picture has always been either like a face or a cartoon, or right now it's a maple leaf. I've never really posted a picture of myself. I don't have my proper birth date on there. I don't have my relationship status, education, workplace, anything. All my work's on LinkedIn though, because, well, why not? And so what's happening with Facebook essentially is you're showing other people's reality. So you're learning about other people and the way other people are by having them show you what they want you to see. And this is the same thing that's happening with television or movies or something. They're showing you what they want you to see. And this ends up being a bit of a problem, because then people act. Now, the problem isn't that. That's just the function. The actual problem is how people take those expectations and act with regard to reality on those expectations. So it's a complicated way of saying they think the world should work like it does in a movie. And to some extent, this is like, this shouldn't happen. No, children don't get into car crashes. It's like, well, yes, they do. Because, in the movies, or television, they're really hesitant to hurt children or show children, or in video games, a lot of times there just aren't children because they don't want you going around shooting children. I don't condone any form of violence against children. And so what happens is you can't imagine this. Now, if you're a first responder, you're going to see this, but if you don't understand the way first responders actually work, you might even advocate that, saying like, well, I don't know, I can't think of an example at this point. But the problem is that when we put this up, we expect medicine, and I've heard people do this where law, in a law court, they need to be yelling at each other, or they need to be a few good menning it, where you can't handle the truth, whereas in reality, law is just one guy cites precedent, another guy cites precedent, the judge asks a question, another guy cites precedent, somebody asks the defendant and then they cross-examine the defendant, and it's just like this boring procedural nonsense. And you can actually go to the courts, like even the small courts, and see, and it's not interesting, because it's their job. They're just sitting there doing their job. And sometimes it'll get a bit dramatic, but not usually. And
usually you get in contempt of court if you start disrupting.
Yeah, or you start, acting like it's law and order. Yeah. Your Honor, I don't believe, or you go, objection. No, you go, objection, you put up your hand politely and you say it. So what happens is, if you go there and you're understanding, a lot of people think, these people in the court are, what do you call it? They're not trying hard. They're not doing it. This is where my taxpayer money goes, or whatever. And so they'll think that something's wrong with the law court, but in reality, you don't know anything about what's going on there. It's so complicated. And there's a reason that those people have 10 years of school just to be in that courtroom doing, having a very polite argument. So
Generally, it's a very like scientific approach that they're taking. Like generally, they're trying to approach a case as impartially as possible to prove that it's not their emotional state that's creating their opinion. It's based on the reality of material fact. So it actually serves against their needs if they start getting animated.
And well, the law is so bloody literal. It's oftentimes is what people are frustrated with. It's when you're reading the law, like there's a reason like they're using all that language. It's not because they're trying to confuse you. This is one of those places where it's not trying to confuse you. They're being as succinct as possible. Every word there is put there for a very specific reason. Every single word. It's not like, a bank statement where, it's just like, look at blah, 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 and they show you a bunch of numbers and they throw a bunch of stuff in your face and they're trying to confuse you. Or it's so literal.
But even like the placement of commas, like if you put a comma before or after something, somebody could take that and interpret a textual literalism based on the pause in the sentence.
Yeah.
It's that specific.
Well, you put the comma here, so it actually means this. Mm-hmm. But that's not what I meant to say. Well, then why didn't you say that? So it's this procedural burden that we expect, but like you do have to understand what's going on. Now, this also comes up in relationships too, where, you see a romantic comedy. A lot of people are like, why can't my relationship be like in the movie? Well, because you're not living in a movie. And this is what it comes down to, is that we are not in a movie. We're in real life. You need to follow reality to some extent and understand that things are the way they are. Again, going back to our trust episode, you have to trust that the law people and the medicine people at least know their job. And if they do it wrong, then you can call them out on it. But to some extent, I guess what I'm saying here, to finish my introduction, is that media is definitely giving us false expectations, and we're acting on them a lot of times in the political and the economic and the personal, in this weird, in all these spheres of our lives. In the kitchen, even the kitchen's probably a very blatant example of this. You go watching cooking shows and they just go, oh look, that's all you have to do to do the onions, and they don't cry or anything or something. It's like, how do they not? Their eyes
That's
start.
the funny thing. They always say how quick things are, and it's like, yeah, if you chop everything up ahead of time and have everything in pre-portioned dishes and use 3 times as much dishes as you actually needed or have at home, then yeah, it's very quick. If you had a slave. Super fast.
Do-it-yourself shows are the worst for this. So all you need to do is this, and then it's just like, all you need to do is this, and have $20,000 worth of tools in your shed. It's like, and I look and it's like, oh, I could build a stand for my wife, and I was thinking of building like this little stand for something she has. She could, display her one of her awards. And I was thinking about it, and I'm looking at it. I'm like, oh, I could do this. I need some felt. I need some this, and I need a jigsaw. Oh, jeez. I need a new saw to actually do that one thing. When that's an investment. Well, now I'm definitely a guy, so this is how guys work. You think you need something, and then all of a sudden, I bought a tool. Now I can make a thing.
I usually just rent now.
Yeah,
go to Home Depot and rent a big jackhammer or something like that. You never have to like store it or maintain it or oil it or anything.
Yeah. Rent a jackhammer?
Oh yeah, you can rent anything.
Man, our shenanigans in school were so lame. We should have known we could rent jackhammers. It's a good thing we were dumb back then.
Well, we were impressed by firecrackers. Like nothing else mattered.
Yeah. Oh man, that was fun times. Anyway, okay, yeah. Youthful shenanigans are definitely exactly the way they are in the movies. Maybe understatement. But
we don't condone them, but it's a rite of passage. I think everybody goes through it at some point to some degree.
Yeah, you kind of need to learn your boundaries and what's good and get it out of your system.
How to be civil.
Yeah, and the only rule there, I guess, is don't get caught. If you get caught, you're stupid. If you don't get caught, you had fun. Anyway, so going back to this, now getting away from going back to my digression there, I guess, was I'm not saying that we shouldn't be watching movies or we shouldn't be watching TV or we shouldn't be playing video games. In fact, I'm saying we definitely should be doing all these things in addition to reading books and, all this. I'm not a purist. Stories are stories. And I've said this before, and a lot of people have said this, humans are storytellers. And we need to be engaging with our stories because this is the best way we learn. And we have to understand that watching and reading and engaging with the media the media. Oh man, this is a weird part. Okay. Media, medium, and media, plural, are really strange words. I had a lot of problems with these in my thesis, but engaging with these in our life is it's almost how we're constructed. We sit around telling stories, each other's stories, in the campfire, 10,000 years ago. And it's just, you get this proto story of Achilles or Hector or Ulysses or, some old emperor or Buddha or something. And they're all sitting around the campfire telling a story. And everyone's just like, yeah, we should be like that. The stories of heroes. See 2 episodes ago.
It's also like the learning by extension, right? Rather than having to live out the failings and faults and accidents of other characters. One of our innate human abilities is to learn through proxy. By somebody else's actions, we can learn. And I think movies are really good for that because timelines are sped up. So you can learn a life lesson in 2 hours instead of it taking 10 years like it does for the character in the movie.
Yeah. And Star Trek was really good for this. It's just the moral story of the week. And it's kind of like, don't be racist. Let people figure stuff out on their own. Don't figure it out for them. That's the prime directive, I guess. But there's movies like Boyhood that carry a character through their entire lives. And that kind of thing is just phenomenal to me. You can only do that in a movie. You couldn't do that. I'm struggling to think of examples at the moment.
Well, there's a bunch. Scent of a Woman was good for that.
I've never seen that one.
Oh, really?
What's that one about?
It's Al Pacino. He's a blind guy. Kid's going to college, and he doesn't want to rat out the other kids, even though he doesn't like them. Anyway, it's a really good movie.
Well, yeah, and there's tons.
The moral dilemma. It's something you don't have to face in your own personal life, but you can still extrapolate from the movie and benefit from it psychologically. And so, learning through stories is important in that sense. But it's also important, like you said, to be aware that they are just stories and not everything in them is literally accurate to the world. You have to sort of pick and choose what you're going to take out.
Right. And I keep thinking of something like, I remember watching something like The Wire, and that was a very good portrayal of the life in various forms. The
school system, the political system.
Just being on the street, what it was like to actually be a cop, what it was like to actually be a gangster, what it was actually like to be, a kid growing up in these neighborhoods. And the stories were really good. And it was almost that representation of it. And what it allowed me, a white kid from Canada, to see was, it got me into the head of the people who I would probably rarely ever associate or even, meet. From Canada, I'm not going to meet Baltimore gangsters, but a completely and utterly different context. I can see in a lot of these shows and movies, California, Latino culture in Stand and Deliver or something like that. These kids going to school. And I was able to get a very brief or, barest sense of what it was like for them. So I could, understand that, there is a different culture there. So movies do this. But the thing is that if I treat Stand and Deliver like it's a textbook on Latino culture, I'm going to get beat up.
You're probably going to act more racist than you do.
Yeah, exactly. So I need to realize that this is a representation. And so the difference between a representation and reality, well, we could go into this. Oh, it's worth going into, is that a representation, I guess, takes the barest, the things it needs to go. So the point of these stories isn't the depiction explicitly, unless it, again, is something like Band of Brothers, where they're trying to show you what happened. This is war. It sucks. Like, these people did it, and somebody needed to do it. and they did it well, and they did it to the best of their abilities, and they should be lauded for it. Don't send more kids out to do that. So, but I get the bare sense of it. So a lot of times with a lot of these movies about inner city youth, about lawyers, you get the representation. And when it's a representation, the thing that's important is the moral of the story. So the moral, okay, let's say the moral story, don't be kind, but like the themes and the motifs and the thing that they're trying to show you is more important than the accuracy of the story. So it's hard for these kids on the streets. But a good teacher can help them overcome the stupidities of or the anti-intellectualism of certain parts of lower class society. Essentially, druggy mom or something. I can't remember what the story was essentially, but that's a good story. It's like, oh, I didn't even know they had to deal with that. So I can, through the representation, if I'm looking at it logically, I can see that people are dealing with that stuff. But then, are they actually dealing with that? And then the reality is, it definitely relates to the reality, but the reality is something that you need to dive into a little differently. Reality you need to dive in to via primary source material, essentially going there and seeing for yourself. Now, if you're white, you can't just walk into Compton and see what's what. You can try, I guess. I probably wouldn't.
I know some people who have, but it's not a safe way of learning. That's all.
No. And no. Although anything safe is probably not worth doing. But that's just me. And so you have to have either, if you don't know the reality of it because you've never seen it or heard of it before, you can't take the representation as literal. And if you do know the reality, it enhances the representation and makes it more colorful. It makes it more vivid. You understand it. Unless the representation is a bad representation, in which case, whatever, who cares? You get a lot of this nowadays where you have like literally just bad stories and it just discord in the head and you just like, what the heck is going on? Sorry, Kris has got so many friends. He's got so many friends. I don't know how he does a podcast. He's just got.
I don't have a landline. Let's just put that simple and clear.
No, he's got a conga line of friends and like very attractive women coming through.
It's a fax machine. But I think what you're getting at too is the imagery helps us remember things too. So even if we heard it in a book or from firsthand from a friend or something like that, having an image from a movie to sort of have your brain attached to a memory makes it a lot easier to process and recall down the road. So even if the story itself is benign and the writing is complete crap, just seeing an area that you're reading about, having that background knowledge of like what California looks like, and then reading about something that happened in California, like the riots or the fires or anything like that, the earthquake, it's just makes a lot more sense as an educational tool, even if not taken literally as a production of itself.
Yeah. So something like, what was that movie? The NWA movie.
Straight Outta Compton?
Yeah, that one. I actually saw that one. Like I've got a part in my hair now, exactly one that you'd think would watch that movie. So do I have a part? Would you call this a part? Anyway, I watched and I was like, oh, that's what was going on in the 90s with this particular scene in this particular, that's not gangster culture. That was what was happening to these half dozen to a dozen artists. They're artists. I don't care if you don't think it's art. It's art. It's just, you may not be what you like. It's still better than postmodern paintings. But these guys, the movie's showing these guys, and you have to realize, and this is kind of what I'm going to get at next, is that they're showing them in the context of what was happening, but they're also showing you what they want you to see. Now, this is the difference between the representation and reality. They're representing it. And it honestly wasn't a bad representation. One of my friends pointed out in the after credit scene where they're showing like actual footage of the pool party and stuff, that like the women weren't actually that attractive all the time, all the groupies and stuff. They were a little rougher around the edges than the depiction had it. But if you're watching a movie about rappers, then chances are you're probably going to be wanting to see some eye candy like that, and you're not going to want to see that reality. And having a bit of artistic license in that doesn't really matter, but it does make them look better, and you have to realize that that's what's happening. And so
it's like having bodybuilder lawyers. Like, it looks so fake to see a courtroom full of like super buff chiseled jaws and stuff. Yeah. You go to a real court, it's just a whole bunch of sloppy bald white guys.
Yeah, or just like I keep thinking like actually I don't want to get into that. That's but like you get just soccer moms in a wig, because that's the lawyer costume in Canada, and it's just people. And this is what we lose a lot of time with when we disregard the reality and the representation, is that a lot of what's happening in those movies, these now we go back to our heroes episode, I guess this is going to become an extension of that, is that we have these people that are acting, and they're just people. They're just people doing something extraordinary, or doing something interesting, or doing something with their skill, or doing something. But in the end of the day, they're just people. And when you say you can't do that, again, you are not realizing they're just people. But I guess the disconnect is that you place yourself aside from it, and you realize that you're not the reality of your own representation. Okay, that doesn't make much sense, but let me unpack it. You have your own story of yourself in your head, right? We all do. And then we have the reality of it. So this is the I guess what the postmodernists would call the subjective interpretation, and then the objective reality, which I don't care if you think it doesn't exist. This is how things are, and we have this in our own life. We tell ourselves a story of our life because we are only living in one moment at a time. Now, we can review a movie, but we can't review our life. And when you compare this story to one that happens in a movie, a lot of the time what happens is you get, and this is the same thing that you see people happening on Facebook, a la the last chapter of Coddling the American Mind. Keep bringing that up, but it's just keeps coming up. Where, on Facebook, you have this representation that doesn't align with reality. And then when that doesn't happen, you get depressed. This is what happens when you don't follow the Tao. You have a disconnect, and you fall off, and you become bitter, you become depressed, you become angry, because you're not aligning with reality. But when you have a representation from overabundant and irresponsible consumption of media, I think is a better way to put it, you find yourself wanting, why am I not an action star? Why don't I look like that? Why can't I be piloting a spaceship? Okay, I'd love to be piloting a spaceship. That'd be awesome. But I have to realize that that's not reality. And I have my own story. My own story, it's mundane, but I live with it every day, which is why it's mundane. And that's the other thing, which I want to come back to. Let me make a note so I don't have to jump to it. We have that representation. And sorry, let me just start again. When we start comparing ourselves to, a doctor on a thing, or a lawyer, or a machine gun star. We start seeing it, but like I said, we live our mundane lives and we live with it every day. And our story is one that seems like it's nothing. Now, our story is the story that we have to live, because we can't just download ourselves into another body or something, or skip around like a video game, or, quick save, restart level or something like that. It'd be nice. There's a few things I would do, but there's a lot of things that I wouldn't do again, because my story, the way I have it, is actually, you know what? I like it. It's my story, and that's the thing. Now, I've gone over parts of my story before, specifically in the I Left episode, which I detailed quite a lot of it, but a lot part of my activism part of my life. But there's a lot of it that I haven't gone over. And that's for a good part, because that's personal, that's mine. But I don't really compare it much to what's happening in media. I don't see myself, what if I was, a soldier of the Great War? What if I was, a fancy medicine? What if I was this or that? What if? Who cares? The healthy response to that is, that's a story. So when I have my relationship and I say, it could be better, it could be this. No, my relationship is what it is. It's not a storybook romance. So,
but it could be. Like, you could teach that type of thing through anybody's story, because everybody loves somebody, and it's always going to look slightly different to different people, right?
Right.
So, like, the story of you falling in love may be different entirely from my story of falling in love somewhere else. But exchanging those stories together actually does, I think, and this is just conjecture on my part, but I think it does help other people understand not just me, but other people. You know what I mean? It's the variety of experience that are similar that helps us get a deeper understanding of all similar experiences, if that makes sense. Yeah.
I tell you my story, and then you have oh wait, he did that. That's not the same, but I think I can adapt that to my situation, which is a lot of what happens. The core,
or you can contingency plan. Like, you could fathom, or what's the word for that? You could imagine other people's responses before they happen. Potential responses, not just one. Like, I'm going to do this, and I know this person is going to react like that. That type of thinking isn't really fair to the other person.
No.
And the only way for us to accept the fact internally that we don't actually know what other people are going to do until they do it is to come up with a whole bunch of potential ways that somebody will respond. Even if you're really sure they'll respond one way, you have to acknowledge the fact that there are so many possible ways for them to respond. You're just dealing with likelihoods, because they could have had a really good breakfast that morning and just been feeling good and then chosen the 10% chance response. You know what I mean? Just based on their body chemistry that day. It could just be that fluid.
My story got a lot more interesting when I started taking those weird chances. but that's just me. But I think, this is where we get back to those people telling stories around a campfire. Well, this is what happened to me. And we do this all the time. Like, you go to a coffee shop with your friend and you start telling your story. So this is what's been happening. Like, my boss did this, and then I did this, and it actually turned out all right, but I'm still kind of nervous about it because, I'm hoping there's no backlash, but I think everyone's better off. But I ruffled a few feathers, blah, blah, blah. What do you think? And you're asking for input. So the other person, you're not asking the other person to be like, here's what you need to do, which is what a lot of people, which is annoying. I'm not asking what you would do. I'm asking, like, do you have anything like this in your story? And when, like, we're not all psychologists, but the other person, like, we're looking for support. We're looking for, similar thing happened in my story. Anecdote reacts to anecdote. I had a boss and they fired me, but you know what? That's their loss. So I'm working in a better place now. And then, it's like, that your story makes my story feel better. Not because it's like I'm comparing the two. It's you're not comparing the two stories. Oh, it's good to know someone else has a worse story. It's like kid with Down syndrome going to university. It's like, if they can do it, you can do it. It's like, what? Of course I can do it. Also, Wait, what?
Yeah,
So
sort of. There's no point to that type of relationship, though. Like the
right.
one story has nothing to do with the other because you'll never experience the same life circumstances as a person with Down syndrome if you don't have it.
Right. So like, yeah, he's got a different story. Like I'm like, anyway. So these two people telling each other their stories solidify the story and say, okay, I'm not acting a representation, and we're both acting out reality. It's good to know that I'm not just losing my mind. And so we tell each other stories not just to give each other information. We tell each other stories to make sure we're not just acting in the representation, to bring us back into reality, make sure the story is aligning with reality. And so you see this a lot with people that write or exist only alone. I remember when I was writing, I came up with some weird stuff, but if you are creating or doing art or writing or doing something in isolation, you'll come up with some weird stuff. And this is a lot of times, like you get someone like Vincent van Gogh, who he was in a French town. He was kind of isolated from everyone else in the art world. And he came up with some interesting and new stuff. But he was Vincent van Gogh. And so he had created this whole new style, all of his own, because he wasn't subject to all the inputs of everyone else. He also went insane to some extent. And when his brother came and got him, he got him the help he needed. And he helped him and he moved him into a doctor's house. Vincent van Gogh showed a lot of improvement, and his art became, brighter and stuff like that. And he came back to reality because he was just, he didn't think. He cut off his ear and then went to the brothel and gave his ear to a hooker saying, "Here, I got you this," or something like that. And so he would be attracted to women that he just the wrong woman every time. And so when his brother was around to show him back to reality, Van Gogh was a lot more grounded, centered, happier, just in general. And yeah, if you're a Van Gogh scholar, definitely write an essay in the comments, please. But so we rely on these stories to not just to show us a good time, but also to ground us in reality. Now, to some extent, I would say that we enjoy these stories not because, we're not doing our work. I think that a lot of times we are chemically enjoy a lot of these stories because they teach us, and it's a evolutionary adaptation. This storytelling, these movies, these songs, these books. Because why do we gravitate towards this stuff? Well, because we're predisposed to tell stories to each other, because that's how we rectify ourselves with reality and learn and gain, and we become more effective by sharing information instead of being like, I'm the barrel maker, I make barrels. Well, what happens when you die? I don't know. I don't care. It's not my problem. It's like, so no, he tells the story about how to make barrels so that when he dies, there's other people to make barrels. And
barrels live on.
Barrels live on. But agriculture lives on. That's very important. So we have all this society because of these stories. But, and here's the big but, and it's a very large but.
And you cannot lie.
No, because if you do lie, the story doesn't get told right, and you get people acting with regard to a reality that doesn't exist. And this is a lot of times what you see with, it's pretty obvious in the media right now. You have a lot of people being like, oh, this is going to get me in trouble. Like I could go in and say I'm this or that. I'm an attack helicopter. That has nothing to do with reality. I'm telling a story that I want to hear, not that exists in reality. And so identifying as an attack helicopter sounds cool, but it's not real. And it would make a good story, but when I take it seriously, it becomes something damaging. to me and those around me. And so that's a pretty dramatic example, but when I do something like, say, go to the range, I have to be telling myself the proper story every single time, or I could get hurt, somebody else could get hurt, and a lot of times criminal investigations start. Guns are serious things. You need to be using them in a very, very respectful way all the time. You need to know what's going on. You need to be aware of the mechanism. You shouldn't just be like, I got a gat. It's like, no. How does that gat work? How does that, is it striker fired? Is it hammer fired? You need to know these things. You need to know grain. You need to know powder load. You need to know
like everything, gauges and...
Oh, yeah. Because barrel. If you don't, you could be like, I just put the bullet in and blah, blah, blah. It's like, no. And you go to any range and there's evidence of these people who have watched too many movies or are afraid of them. And, there's a lane 2, there's evidence of someone who got kicked out of the range because there's just a hole right there in the ceiling. And this is someone who wasn't telling themselves the proper story. They were blinded by, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know the actual story about that hole, but I can probably assume that they were blinded by and I see this a lot of times with people that come in. Like, you can go in to the range I go to and you can see the group of guys that come in on one of their birthdays and they'll be like, yeah, we're going to shoot guns. And the CFO is like, pay attention. And the CFOs are very professional. You have to be, or you'll lose your license as a range. And I've done that job before. Briefly, I left when he pointed a gun at somebody, and he called me a derogatory term for the female genitalia. I don't care. He pointed a gun at somebody. I'm not working for that man.
Yeah, and that's just based on wisdom. Nothing more, nothing less.
So even though I knew the gun wasn't loaded, even though I knew that those two people trusted each other, even though I knew there wasn't even a magazine in that pistol.
Yeah, and that's against the law, like flat out. If you're going to have a license to operate something legally, you can't break the law with it and assume that there's no consequence. That's the reason there are laws and licensing requirements. And it is excessive. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, the way they make you check every time you put it down and pick it up, or if somebody else touches it, you have to check it every time. Mm-hmm. But you do that for a reason. Doing that assures you that you will never harm another person with that gun.
Yeah, it lets my story keep going.
Yeah. And if everybody does it, then we can trust everybody is using their guns responsibly, because we can visibly see them doing those redundancy checks to make sure that everything's being operated safely.
Yeah, and if you watch, but no, that's right, because the benefit is that when we're all responsible about it, and the Canadian gun community goes way above and beyond for this, for the most part. Like, that one story I'm telling about that one range owner, that's an outlier. That guy's a goof, though. If you see anything goofy with regard to this stuff, you just go to a different place. It's going to be a little more in line with reality. Now, I love gun movies. Like John Wick, those were good movies. I really like those movies, and those are probably the best depiction of guns ever outside of a war movie, really. But even those movies are generally mess it up sometimes. But I'm
partial to those like 90s and early 2000s action movies with Van Damme and Nick Cage or Schwarzenegger, Stallone.
Yeah, Stallone with like two M60s, just like, and his muscles are bulging because those guns are like heavy unloaded. Yeah. And so you get this idea that like, oh, they make it look so easy. Here's the trick. Now, I've been shooting pistols for about a year and a bit now. And I've been shooting rifles for a long time, but pistols are hard. They're really hard to just to hold. You got to grip it properly, and then you have to like to hit something, and to get a grouping like that has taken me a year of hard work, and it's been like a lot of work just sitting there, consistency, getting it right. And
it's exercise and discipline and breathing, and it's all those little things that you do for like sports. It's the same as that, except it's just a different type of sport. Like playing pool requires the same type of concentration as shooting a gun, and swinging a golf club has the same type of mental practice as playing pool.
And watching a golfer do that makes it look easy. Watching someone play pool, well, it's kind of like in the pool movies where you see them go and everyone knows when they see a stupid shot in pool. Anyone who plays pool is just kind of like, neat shot, impossible, but neat. And so when you make a bad shot, the worst you're going to get is the ball flies up and hits the guy, in the face or something. Maybe it hits his drink and it, the glass shards, and it's like, no one's going to kill anyone playing pool.
Yeah.
But when you see what people who practice a lot with firearms do, what they are capable of, like you try firing a 3-round burst from a semi-automatic pistol and hit every target at 25 meters. Well, I can't do that. I've seen people do it, and doing that on the move, it's amazing. And like, honestly, a lot of these guys are in the military and the police forces, and I want them to be able to do that.
Because it's really important for them to disable when they're trying to disable and kill when they're trying to kill. Like, it's very, very important that they're not just that they hit their target, but where they hit their target.
Yeah. And like in a gunfight, oftentimes you don't really have a choice of where you hit the target. If you want to hit the target. And so a lot of times, also knowing it allows you, if you actually get in a situation where you do need a firearm, you don't need to fire your firearm. And this is what they don't show in the thing. They just be like, in the cowboy movies, they're just sitting on the table and just one of them goes, no, because people don't want to get hurt. And you really need to realize that firearms and psychology interact. In reality, not in the representation. In the representation, you can shoot as many people as you want. Like, go play Call of Duty or go play Red Dead Redemption. Like, you can shoot people. Why? Because it's a video game. It's like, well, they shouldn't be able to do that. It's like, no, they should be able to shoot as many people as you want in a video game, because it's a video game. It's a representation. It's a story. Now, it's like, oh, kids are going to get the wrong impression. It's like, yeah, which is why we have to teach. Well, the thing what we're going to get to is...
That's why we have ratings, too. You don't let kids watch rated R movies because they're not mature enough to process the difference between reality and movies, as well as an adult. Or like ratings on games. A mature rating isn't just a symbol they throw in the game for legal reasons. Like, parents should not be buying 18 plus games to kids unless the kid can come up with a thesis that explains how their entertainment is separate from their actual life's manifestation.
Mm-hmm. Now, what happens if let's keep an eye on that, because we're going to talk about that a bit more, but I want to get through this. If I am in say society's collapsed and I am off hunting for food and I meet someone who just wants to take my stuff. Okay, we're in Fallout world, but whatever. I don't have to just shoot them and loot them. One thing, your gun provides you with a lot of alternative uses, and this is what they never show in the movies, or rarely do. You have a very loud safety. It's very loud. So a lot of times, and this is, I guess the military people call this escalation of force, but what you can do is, you chamber around, click, big click. That click is a threat. That click has implied intentions. And then you remove the safety. Another click, dude, are you sure you want to do this? And then you bring the weapon to bear, not aiming it. You're just bringing it up. And then, it's like, fine, if you attack me, I will attack first. And so you don't want, just because you have a gun doesn't mean you need to shoot it. It's a threat in itself. And so this happens with, and this is not just happens with firearms, but it's never depicted like this. If you have knowledge of what your firearm is capable of, and if you have knowledge of what other people perceive it as, then you can use it accordingly in a situation like that. And police know this. They put their hand on their waist, and the person in the car is just like, "Oh, officer, how's it going?" Because they know what power that pistol gives them. And so then they go and they see that you're just some like scared, 19-year-old kid, and you're just like, "Sorry, I thought you were a different," or like, "I thought you were one of the cars we were looking for," or something. Or they'll never say that, but they'll be thinking that. It's just like, "Oh, it's just some pissant kid." And so they'll
You would hope so.
Their hand will go from their pistol to their notebook, in which case you get more shit scared, because now it's like, "Oh, I'm not going to get shot. Oh no, I have to live with the reality of a ticket." Or like, I've got to deal with autopack now. So the reality is that it's a lot more complicated than that. So the lesson, like, you can learn the moral lesson, like stand up to the bad guys in your life, from like a cowboy movie. It's a great lesson to learn. If you're getting bullied on the playground, you don't just let them bully you. You stand up. Like, you earn your respect. And it's like, "Oh no, don't fight back," or "Don't do this." It's like, no, I never got anything. I was a small kid in school. I got bullied a lot. I got more points for throwing a punch back, even though my little chicken arms didn't do anything. But for fighting back, I got left alone, which is, I guess what I wanted on the playground. Although I moved a lot, so I had to learn this lesson over and over and over again. It never stuck because I kept having to change schools.
Practice, man.
Yeah. So I learned the lesson in reality. Now, when it comes to something like medicine or law or cooking shows, the person cooking, I like the person who knows how to use his firearm, knows how to use their knife. Now, it's not saying the knife is a weapon, but they know how to like do that thing where they can just go and just like have diced tomatoes or something, just like that. And they have like, like, I can't do that. And so it's, reality doesn't align. You have to realize that you don't do that. Now, when you get people, now, I guess the solution to all this, isn't getting rid of media depictions of certain things, isn't banning cigarettes from movies, isn't making the bad guys in our movies different colors, or making them a certain way. Like, what's wrong with German bad guys? Like,
or all the Russians they use. Yeah, the Russians. Everybody loves being scared of the Russians.
Oh, they're fun to be scared of. And then you meet an actual Russian and they're just like fun. Russians are pretty fun. They're not bad people individually. When they start getting together in large numbers, you get very high levels of "Oorah!" and then you get weird stuff going on. But they're
populations are going to be aggressive if they're under dictatorships. That's just guaranteed. And if they're not aggressive yet, like the North Korean public, they will be eventually, because that's trauma. You're traumatizing an entire population from the ground up.
Yeah,
politically.
That one North Korean defector woman is making the rounds on the podcast circuit. And
if not just the rounds, she's going everywhere.
Everywhere, like on all sides. And she's making the circuit, and her story is horrific. Mm-hmm. The reality.
And unfortunately, that's all she has, because she's spent a life oppressed. An entire lifetime where she couldn't develop skills or do public speaking or study or do anything that we take for granted. So I think it's really important that they speak up. But like, if you had 100,000 of those, you couldn't just host them all on podcasts and news shows. There's just too many.
Mm-hmm. And she's talking about the reality. And there's a lot of like, I think my wife watched a Korean drama show recently where like pop South Korean woman gets stranded in North Korea by accident or something, and she gets this hunky North Korean soldier, tall, strong. There's two things that don't happen in North Korea, and attractive, rescue her, and they're like, I can't hand her over. I've got to take care of her. And him and his plucky squad of soldiers, because they're soldiers in North Korea, have to deal, like, they show you how bad things are, but it's way worse. In North Korea, and they make it to South Korea, and they end up saying, well, I'm going back because that's where I'm from. That's kind of like a depiction of it. The reality shows up in this girl's, and this woman now, in her story, where, you know, she it's like the worst thing Orwell had come up with, and it's completely reality. So you know, they don't have the word I, they use we and us for everything. It's soul shattering, and the reality. But so we have to act with regard to the reality of what North Korea is, not with what we have it depicted in stories, because stuff like that, it's worse than what is in the stories. And
it's also better too, in some respects. Like, if you think about the love and compassion shown by the South Korean people universally for defectors of North Korea, that's astonishing. And almost nowhere do you ever see that, where a country at war with another country who's on standby border allows people to come through and not treat them as a POW. Like, they will feed them and clothe them and educate them and try and integrate them into society. And it's just beautiful, but it's not sensational, so it's not movie worthy, right?
Apparently there is some stigma with regard to that. The North Koreans are treating the defectors as a kind of like this, like, they're a bit of a subclass, but they're free. They're not like saying, okay, what do we do with you? What do you do with someone who's been oppressed their entire life? And it's like, you give them a job. Okay, we give them a job. And then there's a lot of suspicion of them too, though. But they are helping them. And they're not slaves. They're not, or
they're not thrown in jail, and they're not tortured for information. Like, they could be used as tools, employees to try and, they could torture them and tell the North Korean government to do something for them to get them to stop, which they obviously wouldn't. But the point is, they could be aggressive. And in the States, they have Guantanamo Bay. So the land of freedom that goes and murders in the name of freedom doesn't do what South Korea does with their defectors. They lock them up in an international prison where they have no laws, and they invoke the Patriot Act, and they do all kinds of things.
Not a fan of the Patriot Act. Go read Snowden. But
it's important to point out just that the story itself isn't always better, and it's not always as bad as it looks. Like, the real story is usually more.
I think when we look at the representation of something like that romantic comedy, I think it was called Crash Landing on Me or Crash Landing on You. It's on Netflix. I was just like, this is stupid. You have to watch it. And she did. And apparently it was cute. But the fact that they have this depiction of North Korea, like, means that, like, the South Koreans definitely are, at least, it shows more about the nature of the South Koreans than it does of the depiction of the North Koreans. And I think that's important, because you have to take, and this comes to the solution, clunky segue, is that you have to look at what you're watching and what you're reading, not with a skeptical or critical approach, but with as it is. It is a depiction. It is a representation. You have to be aware of that at all times. We have to, with regard to what you said earlier about ratings, is that, kids, it's harder for kids to do this. It's harder for certain people to realize this and take it as a representation and not just as literal. This is the story. This is what you should be. You should be, I don't know, what's being depicted on the screen. You should be a doctor that does this, like, what's his name? House or something. You should be, because this is what the best doctor is. It's like, no, that's what that particular character doctor is. It's a representation. And the purpose of it is important. The medium is the message. It's showing you that because that's the way that they're going to tell the story, not that's what they're telling you that the way it should be. And it's harder for kids to realize this, which is why we kind of ease them into representation. We don't show them like, you're 6 now, it's time to watch, Saving Private Ryan. It's like, ugh. Now, Saving Private Ryan is an interesting one because you have that super realistic intro scene, which is supposed to be a representation, but it's supposed to be realistic as possible. But then after that intro part, when they start to go off to actually save Private Ryan, it becomes very allegorical. it's a representation of a lot of the war, and not just it stops being literal. There's caricatures, there's archetypes. On the beach, there's no archetypes. There's just soldiers. This is what it would have looked like from the point of view of the main character and stuff like that. But you don't know anything about the main character. He's just a captain or a lieutenant. He's American, who's storming a beach. But then once you get characterization in that, it becomes archetypal. It becomes, this is what the war would have been like. This is a representation of the war and how bad it is and how terrible these things are, and how people would have gone through it, because you can't show these minute stories. Now, if you want those less representational stories, go read War Diaries or something by Stephen Ambrose. The Diary of Helmut von Luck is really good because it's from the perspective of a German soldier, and which is really interesting. He ends up in a gulag after the war. The war didn't end for him till like 1950 or something. So when we are approaching this media, we have to realize as to what it is. And now I'm definitely trained to do this. This is half of my job. You know, when I read a document, I have to be like, what is this trying to show me? How is this a representation? Where is the bias here? What is going on in this document? And I have to be aware of that. But we all kind of have to be aware of that with ourselves. And we can't let an over reliance on media show us what we're supposed to and how we're supposed to be living. And I think this is hard for a lot of people. It's hard for me sometimes, you know, because you watch these things and you're like, oh man, I wish I was that cool. And it's that simple. So I don't know, how do we deal with that? And frankly, I think it's a very nuanced answer, and it changes from person to person. But I think realizing that it's just TV is probably one of the first things we need to do.
But I think the hard part is people differentiating the parts of TV that they're allowed to take in and the parts that they're not allowed to take in. And by allowed, I mean like allowing themselves. So like for us to watch a movie completely aware and competent of how guns work, or at least partially, we know not to accept the unrealities of movies, like when people gun butt somebody and don't expect their gun to jam after hitting them with the...
Depends on the gun.
It
like
does,
if it's a revolver, like, yeah.
The point is,
smack them all in the head.
The difficulty is a person realizing that something they just saw is worth criticizing or not. That's the part that's difficult, because you can't really teach all situations to people. You have to teach them similar situations. So like when two people fall in love at first sight, yeah, it's close to possible, but it's not it's not the ideal way of falling in love. As romantic as it seems, there's a much deeper love to be had when you realize you're in love with somebody after knowing them, I think.
Yeah. I have lust at first sight. And for some reason, love at first sight isn't as stupid as it sounds. Because with my wife, I knew, you kind of get a feeling. It's again, it's not mystical. It's not metaphysical. That's metaphysical in a way, but it's not like outside the realm of reality. You know, it's no one ordained me to be with my wife. I was lucky. But you go through life and you meet people. I hate that guy. Oh man, that guy looks cool. And you don't even know them. You don't even talk to them. Some people are just neutral. Some people just don't have any presence in your mind. And it's this, your brain telling me like, this is a person that you'll jive with. You should talk to them. And this happens. And every once in a while, you know, that lust at first sight and that jive, your brain says like, it's decoding all the minutia of information that's coming into you. And then you see this person, you're just like, I'm going to get along with that person. I'm going to get along with that person so well. Like we sat down and it was, best friends the first time. I remember where we were. We were in, it was in the third class where it was like English and math. and we just sat down in the back row on the right hand side of the thing. We're just like making fun of this program, and we're just like, oh, we're gonna be friends, aren't we? And it just happened. We just kind of knew that we were gonna get along, and we did for like, well, it's 20 years later. And like actually literally 20 years later.
The ability to distinguish the difference in the movie from the reality of that type of an encounter, though, I think is really important. And I think that comes from maturity and exposure through time. So you can't just start somebody off with a mature theme and expect them to get all the nuance. They have to progressively watch like G-rated movies to see like what a relationship is and what a villain is. Then you watch PG movies so that you see like how the main characters sometimes make mistakes. Then you have your rated R movies where everything, there's no holds barred. You can do whatever you want with the plot and the directing and the action scenes and all that. And it's assumed that the people already have a background knowledge from which to criticize. But if you have no critical perception of what parts to pick out, you're sort of screwed from the get-go. Like you have no chance at actually figuring out what's worth taking in as an influential scene and what's not.
Right. And this is muddied further by reality TV, which
people think is real. And that's
it's called reality TV. And it's almost less real, I would say. I would pause it, and I'll you know what, I'm gonna die on this hill a bit. At least I'm gonna get wounded on this hill. It's less real than fiction TV. Now, okay, there's a few different things I'm trying to say here. There's reality TV, which we'll get into. Then there's fiction, like Star Trek's more real than, it has more bearing on reality than reality TV. It tells you an actual moral with archetypes that you can readily recognize, and it has more bearing on reality than reality TV. Sports, which I could argue is technically reality TV, is actually real. Same with live news feedcasts, with, you know, where they're just showing you what's happening without the interpretation. This is something that's happening in reality. It's just they're showing you something that's happening in reality. It's like watching CPAC or something. You're watching the House of Commons do its thing, unfiltered. Now, sports is more interesting, but that is actual reality TV if you're watching a hockey game, because it's actually happening. So there's not really much interpretation. Now, there is like the commercials and telling you what you should and shouldn't like, and this happens just like any other piece of media, where you need to be like, okay, I don't actually need a hamburger to be happy. And this is a kind of a microcosm of what we're trying to say here. But reality TV there's nothing redeemable about it. There's just people, when you put on this, you know, that psychological thing, when you observe a experiment, it changes the result of the experiment just because it's like somebody's watching me. And so they act with regard to that. And so that's why it makes psychology so difficult to process.
But it's also the character selections. Like if you're going to make a show and you want it to be interesting, you're going to pick people who are flamboyant and like stir the pot. You're going to pick gadflies. That's the point of the show, is to make it interesting. So the people producing the show intentionally make conflict. That's not reality. You don't just bump into these people all the time, and they're picking out the 1 in 100 who's most annoying, and you're plopping them in a room and calling it Big Brother. Yeah,
you just like, you pick out somebody who just makes noises, and then a bunch of other people, like put a bunch of ADHD people in a room together and they'll fight.
Like, they probably develop like nuclear fusion.
Yeah, just to spite each other. But
they fix the world's problems.
Like it's tailored reality, in which case it's not a representation. So, you know, you have these poorly adjusted, overly sexy people walking around doing this stuff. Now, on a cooking show, generally you're going to get people who are actually cooking. But if you get like something like, I don't know too much about this. Like Survivor was always like, I remember taking survival training on like how to survive in the woods when I was a teenager. And then Survivor came on at about the same time. We're all looking at like, these people are idiots. They're going to starve to death. Like, they're going to die.
One guy almost did by leaning over a fire and breathing in all the carbon monoxide. He like fell on top of the fire because he passed out.
It's immoral. Don't be like that guy. Yeah. But like,
so there are some things you can learn from reality TV that are real, but it's usually not involved in the story.
Your parents can tell you that at a campfire. It's not some like moral story like, you know, Jesus said in Corinthians 4:3, don't inhale the fumes of a campfire. It's bad for your lungs. Like, come on. Like, it's not exactly
while leaning over top of it.
Yeah. Don't step in campfires when you're drunk, or like, don't drink around fire. Like, come on. These are things that you can learn. Like, these are small things. These are points of procedure. They're not things that will teach you how to be a better person. And we're taking those as actual, you know, wisdom. Now that's a point, like I said, it's a point of procedure. Don't like wear a scarf in the winter. Like, I don't need a reality television show to teach me that. One bout of pneumonia will teach me that for the rest of my life. And
I think that's sort of where it gets difficult, though, because some people have the benefit of good parents. And I don't mean the subjective good parent, as in the one who is Mother Teresa or whatever, but I mean the parent that teaches those type of life skills.
Yeah.
And some people don't. And the people that don't are less apt to consume more mature media appropriately, to put it very vaguely.
Appropriately, responsibly. Yeah, that's exactly it.
But it all comes down to their background knowledge, because you can only do something mature after you've developed some type of maturity, and maturity requires some type of progression from immaturity to maturity.
Yeah.
And if people are stunted and immature, and then they grow up that way because they've just been feasting on all of this bad mental drama from, you know, sitcoms and video games or whatever it is that they consume on a regular basis without actually thinking about it. If that's their entire life right to adulthood, as adults, they'll assume they're mature just for the sake of their own age, and not even realize that they have no critical thought. And without that critical thought, you can't actually analyze anything that is mature with any mature reasoning. You're just going to be pulling everything out from everything you see and assuming that it's all real.
That's exactly it. And that's why a lot of parents will shy away from having, it's like, just don't play video games. I'm like, no, there's a lot of good video games out there.
And you can learn a lot from the experience of being immersed inside of a video game too. So it's not just entertainment. They're also reading, they're problem solving, it's action reflexes.
Jedi Fallen Order was a great game. Like, it's a great story. Play the game. It's a good story. And there's lots of games out there. Like, there's a lot of games out there. Like,
Metal Gear Solid 2 was like really a mindfuck. Like, right. The whole thing was about like I don't want to give it away, but actually everybody should play that game if nothing else, just because
I don't think you can give away a Kojima game. Like, it's so convoluted. You like telling spoilers doesn't help.
Well, but that one specifically had a huge twist at the end, and it like related to all of regular life too, except for the fact that, you know, it's a game and it's entertainment. But like the ideas they spawn make you really, really think about the world outside. And that to me is like the hallmark of a good piece of media, not just for entertainment, but any media that makes you think deeply about your real life without being forced to believe or think something that's erroneous. I think that's really beneficial. That's what art is supposed to do. That's what music is supposed to do, and painting and sports even. Like, to be able to realize that some human being, even if not me, can free climb a mountain that was previously unclimbable. Just knowing that it's possible for the human body to do that changes the way I might reflect on like climate change and realizing what humanity can endure physically from the changing tides of nature. So like, we can take a lot of abuse, but we're also very fragile as a people. But discovering similarities of just our nature and what we're capable of, those types of things give us a more mature outlook on what we can handle moving forward in the unforeseen. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And
I think that's like a developed knowledge, though. That's not something you can just teach directly as a point form question in 1 year and say, now you're a critical thinker. It comes from a basis like a really firm basis where you apply this type of approach to everything you've approached and for an extended period of time.
And that's kind of, that's a good point. That's why I have qualms with the education system, is because like they give you a certificate and all of a sudden you know this. It's like, again, go to our certificates and go to our Marks Don't Matter episode for that. But for an example of what you're talking about, I brought this up. My favorite show was Babylon 5 when I was a kid, because there was giant spaceships blowing the living hell out of each other, just these epic set piece battles, but the story linked them all together. And then, every once in a while you get a point of wisdom that would just move you more than the biggest explodiest battle in the show. And I don't know, you get stuff like this one. The main character is talking to this emperor guy, and he says, the emperor starts looking at, I've never had a choice in my entire life. I'm emperor of an entire species, and I haven't made one single decision in my entire life, and because I'm scared. Like, so much pain, so much blood, and for what, I wonder. The past tempts us, the present confuses us, and the future frightens us, and our lives slip away moment by moment, lost in the vast, terrible in between. Just like, oh, geez, and that hit me. That hits you hard. And it's this cable television show about aliens on a space station. And because it was a piece of mature, it was a mature story, and it's a representation of us, and that's what teaches us. And even though it's not trying to patronize you, saying like, glorified Sesame Street, where it's just like, here's the things you need to know about your life, blah 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 blah. And like, whenever media tries to do that, like, you get Law and Order doing that constantly, like, I can't believe someone would do this, my God. Or like some heavy-handed moral.
You wonder why they think, like, there are people out there in the Me Too movement who think there's a culture of rape in Canada and the US. And it's because they're watching all of this TV where there's constantly violent rape, like not NYPD Blue, but Law and Order and stuff like that. CSI, SVU, the Special Victims Unit.
CSI is a good example of this, because CSI tries to tell you this morality, and it tries to throw a morality at you. But what we don't realize is that CSI is literally, the point of the show is to shock you. Oh my God.
They hear it so often, they don't even realize that they're believing that there's this rampant rape culture in the world. Mm-hmm. And there just isn't. Flat out, every human being you meet wants to love somebody and raise children. Mm-hmm. They might wind up down the road raping somebody through a fit of passion or trauma, or maybe they're psychopaths, that 1 in 1,000. Well, but like, to say there's a culture of rape would imply that it's on our billboards and it's in our movies and we're teaching kids to do it and we're saying that it's okay and we're not prosecuting people. Like, to say there's a culture of rape is patently false. If you just look around the world today.
Well, to say that is to assume that all men do it, but it's just like, oh, well, don't do it. It's like, oh, well, I never thought of that. It's like, of course I'm not going to do it. I want to have, like,
but that's sort of the
first of all, I don't want to do it. Second of all, I like having mutual intercourse is like, it's night and day. It's preferable. Yeah. Let's just say that. It's a small word for it, but I get so much more from that and beyond the sexual realm.
But the point is, they don't even realize that they're carrying a belief that they developed from watching TV.
Yes.
They don't even realize that believing in rape culture in Canada or the States is because of an influence of a television show or blog articles, not because they went out into the real world and they heard people talking at bus stops about the chick they raped yesterday.
Yeah.
And it also doesn't even address the female on male rape or gay rape. They don't even talk about it hardly.
Well, and it's highlighting the problem instead of highlighting the reality. I'm just saying what you're saying, but you get this depiction of, like, they think the reality is like, these are a couple outliers. Like, I know the outliers do more damage than everyone else in society. Like, few bad apples ruin the bunch. But if you have 10 rapists in your little municipality, which isn't a lot. A municipality is a big thing, or like, but those 10 people can do a lot of damage and can create a lot of fear in that thing. So we need, like, this is why we have police officers to deal with those who will do that, who are damaged enough to do such a heinous act. And this goes with like any other crime, like robbery, murder, or anything like that. We don't have a murder culture. In fact, far from it. Like if you say, well, we should have a death penalty in Canada, some people will be like, yeah, but a lot of people will be like, no, I'm not sure about that.
But see, the thing is, in the States, they actually do have a murder culture. There is a culture where if you walk up to a random American, they will promote their stand their ground laws, like in Texas and Florida or Mississippi or things like that. Mm-hmm. That's actually a cultural thing, where like groups of people will openly speak proudly about murdering an individual who invades their property. They're like, I want a gun at home so I can defend myself from a home invasion. That's fine if that's your thing, but to say it on TV and write it on your Facebook and to tell people outright, like to boast about it, that's a culture of it.
Well, that's you get that with every culture, and that's one thing I don't like about like firearm culture. Like I said, I'm in the firearm community, I guess, but like it's the same thing with like motorcycle culture or weed culture. But like you get people going around like, I don't have anything against someone having a firearm to defend their home. Making that your identity, though, is the same thing as that rape culture thing, where you are elevating one issue to above everything else because you think that that's what's happening because you watch too much news, you watch too many movies, you don't have, there's that disconnect between reality and thing. Now, just because I'm willing to defend my home with a firearm, or would be in Canada, please don't come looking for any shotguns in my foyer. I don't even own a shotgun. But if I was to have a weapon, it'd probably be the best one to do it with. Whatever. The thing is that I'm probably not going to have a home invasion. The worst thing I'm going to suffer is the neighbor kids coming on my lawn all the time looking for their cat and just deciding to have a conversation in my backyard where I will just use things like words to be like, dude, get off my property. I'm trying to garden here. So there's not an actual problem here. The reality of it is important. The representation of it is fun. You get something like, again, that John Wick scene in the first movie where, he literally has a home invasion, but he's up against gangsters who are out to get him because he stole a car from another guy who stole his car and killed his dog. So he's got like 10 hitmen coming out. Now, I'm not going to get hitmen after me. I'm a YouTuber, historian, husband dude. Like, it would be a chance in a billion if someone actually came into my house.
But even if you wanted to prepare yourself for it and you wanted a gun for it, it's the subliminal influence of television that gives you the belief that it's necessary to create a culture of it, to be boastful about it and to speak openly about it, to like scare other people into thinking that they're going to have a home invasion. You know what I mean? Like, the problem isn't, in my eyes, it's not the fact that people are consuming media that's distasteful. The problem is they don't even realize the influence or impact it's having on them psychologically in other unrelated decisions they're making in their lives, such as where to stash a gun in case the John Wick guys come after me. Like, You're not that important. Nobody is.
But there are certain neighborhoods that if I ended up living in, I'd probably be more inclined.
But you wouldn't brag about it. You'd want that to be hidden. You'd want them to not know to look for it.
Like, are you armed? It's like, it's good weather today. It's like, well, tell me if you're armed. It's like, no. No, because if I'm actually serious about defense, I have to, like, if I'm actually serious about like defending my home and I'm living in a bad neighborhood through no fault of my own, then I'm going to be doing it in such a way that, I'm not going to be doing it.
But again, the harm to me is the fact that we accept that there are bad neighborhoods. That to me shouldn't even be a thing. We should say, if there's crime in this neighborhood, we should all collectively try and change that. Crime should be disparate across all populations. It shouldn't be relegated just to certain low-income housing projects or something. See, that to me is the problem. We are so conditioned to think it's normal to have bad areas that we just accept them to be there. And there's no reason that needs to be the case. If I was a criminal, I would steal from rich people. Why is there a crime in my neighborhood if I'm living in a poor neighborhood stealing from rich people? what we're doing is a self-perpetuating, self-fulfilling prophecy by assuming that things have to be real in reality because we've seen them so often in movies and TV, that there are bad neighborhoods, there's always been bad neighborhoods, there always will be bad neighborhoods. That's just not the case. You can fix a neighborhood just by equal opportunity. Like things like that just go, they slip under the rug. Like they're not even acknowledged as assumptions while we're making the assumptions, and we're making decisions that affect them based on these latent assumptions. That to me is the problem with an immature processing of media.
Well, an immature assumption is, don't want to dive into economics or stuff because that's another topic.
Yeah, it's totally another topic. But just as an example, that's a way that we've been manipulated and influenced, all of us. But
the immature assumption, I like that. I like that phrase, and it's a lot of times. I think that's a good way of putting what I've been trying to talk about this entire time. With you rely on these bad treat representation as literal, and an immature assumption is a perfect way of looking at it. I love that, but. Again, as a society, that doesn't mean we should like censor this stuff. And I think censorship is, again, too far, and we can't keep people from representations because that starves them. You end up with someone who's now suffering in another way. And like
ignorance is much, much worse because then you invent ideas and assumptions rather than having them dictated.
What should we, and then like you end up giving them propaganda. So we really don't want to do that. You censor the stuff that could be problematic, banning books or burning books, like happened in Ontario last year. I just learned about that. It's fuming. They literally burned books.
In Canada?
Yeah, it was like last year. They had one of the Ontario school divisions admitted to burning books, and it was just stuff like Asterix and Tintin because they showed bad representations of Indigenous people, but they just had Indigenous people in the books, and so they took them off the shelf, so they banned them, and then burned the copies of the books, and then ceremonially buried them.
That is unreal.
This is real. It was just in the news a couple days ago.
Yikes. But that should scare people, like civilians and citizens alike. Like that should scare all of us. The fact that we're so.
I've got books of every stripe behind me, and if they're not going to come for my guns. Well, they're already doing that, but if they start coming for my books, and this society's gone. And so, it's a far cry from that right now. But the thing is that if we start censoring stuff. First of all, the problems of free speech come up. How can we argue against things that are wrong if we're not allowed to argue against the things that are wrong? But you have what ends up being propaganda, and people hate propaganda of every stripe. It's because it sounds like propaganda. It's asinine. It doesn't take the person seriously. It's patronizing. It feels like Sesame Street for adults.
They love subtle propaganda, things that they don't realize, like that gun and bitches and whores culture in rap. That money, I pimp bitches out, sell drugs, and like all of that is propaganda.
Yeah,
like straight up, and they're trying to make it look cool and appealing by but it's no different from like ISIS telling a suicide bomber they're going to get virgins in heaven if they blow themselves up. You're manipulating people into being part of that society so that you can exploit them and make money off them.
Well, it's like, and when you control the message, when you control the representation, so people start acting with regard to that. Okay, we're just defining propaganda at this time. But all it's doing is this is to make society, this is to make people safer. No, it's to further the ends of the people that are providing the propaganda because they think that's right, because they don't want to deal with reality themselves. Because and here's one of the things about it is that the representation is easy because it's fake. It's a fiction. You can just absorb it. It's not happening to you. You're not the one storming the beach. You're not the one fixing your relationship. Maybe you should be. You're not the one dealing with your coworkers. You're not the one in a court trial, luckily. But you might be. You might be having relationship problems. You might get drafted. hopefully not, you might end up in a court trial. Well, what do? Well, if the propaganda says do nothing, just let someone do it for you. No, you're going to have to deal with this stuff in your own life. And so propaganda just gives you the approved message that you want. And when it makes it so you can't think for yourself. And that's what we want in society. We find out that when we have more brains put together instead of just one guy at the top or a couple guys at the thing, you end up not being able to make your own decisions. You just end up doing what you want. So, which is why media is so powerful, these representations. And if it's comfortable for you to live in your representation rather than allow the representation to aid you fighting in your reality. And now I'm saying fighting, but I mean like fighting to keep your marriage together, fighting to keep your friends, fighting to get home on time to spend time with your children. These are things worth fighting for, and you fight for them every day. Just like you fight with the pots and pans when you accidentally burn some of the rice into them. You got to fight and scrub. You're fighting, and it's reality. And it's that mundane part of reality that's important. But when you end up not being willing to deal with the reality and saying, okay, I'm just going to approve this. This is the approved way of dealing with reality as based on the representation sanctified by the Catholic Church. Well, we saw how that went. As sanctified by the religion of this Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, as sanctified by the Nazi Party regime, as sanctified by this or that government. You know what? The reason Canada and America are so powerful culturally is because we can tell whatever stories we want, and we can allow the individuals to come up with that with ourselves. Creates its own chaos. But when we have more representations, the individuals in our society can think and have that for itself, and we don't need to be spoon-fed a representation brought down by God, but some guy telling a story. And
I think that right there is the benefit of having inclusivity and diversity and things like that. Like what you're talking about right there is just, it's not that the brown, black woman or whatever has more to say than somebody else. It's that you need the disparate ideas, all of the different images and stories, and you need the diversity of thought in order to be able to have the mature analysis and critical thought of any individual specific thing that you're seeing.
Yeah, and like I don't want a racist person, like we need a black person just saying what I want to say. Like if you want, like that's problematized by like go read Thomas Sowell or something. Black.
And that's the problem with the quota, is that it's like an enforcement of the black, and that's not what you need. You just need some people who happen to be black.
Because
you
there
need
are
them
people
as part of.
My neighbors happen to be Indian, like, and on the other side they happen to be Native, Indigenous Canadian, and across the street they're black. They just happen to be black, and
that's to me
I'm
is what's
probably going to be voting for a woman in the local civic election because I like her platform better, not because she's a woman. It has nothing to do with it. There's another woman in there that says, I'm a woman, and I'm not voting for her because of that, because she just happens to be a woman. The people behind me are white. It doesn't matter. It matters who they are. Like,
and what they stand for and what they believe in. And it also matters that they have different stories. And like having the same stories repeated over and over again might be fun, but to the layman or for the average person who's not even realizing that it is propagandized, like that's a problem.
And I think the best way that an individual can do this, I'm saying like the individual is important. I keep saying that, like it's
that's what it comes down to.
Indisputed how powerful a society of individuals is. The fact that we're still talking about this is completely ridiculous. And so anyone who advocates for just like, no, just let other people deal with it. Just let a collectivist society, that's it'll actually be better. It's like, well, why? Because, it's religion and propaganda. So go away. Your story's false. But the individual has a responsibility to ask, why do I keep watching this movie over and over again? I've seen, like I said, I brought up Babylon 5, which probably a bunch of you haven't heard of. I must have watched that 10 times in my lifetime. It came out in like 96. Because I keep coming back and there's still some truth there that I can digest. And, one of the things I notice is that when I was in my more cynical times, I was just like, but I still watched it. And now I watched it again with my wife, and I was just like, it hit even harder than it did like before. And so the stories changed with me over my life. But if you ask yourself, why do I keep watching this or that? You learn about yourself. And you learn about what that message is. And you say, well, why do I keep watching this? And there's stuff that I've discarded because I didn't like the answer. Well, why do I keep watching this? Because it makes you feel good. It makes you feel this. It makes you, want to fight people. And it's like, oh, I don't like that. I don't want to just, watch something that makes me want to go out and be like, yeah, I want to fight. And so I realized
if you do like it, you just need to make a conscious effort to split it up. That's
you need to something like
make sure sometimes you're watching some things that are different.
Yeah. So like I liked the movie V for Vendetta. That was a great movie. Very powerful. One of their better movies. Now it is very like anti-authoritarian, which I liked. It's very fight the power, which I definitely liked when I was younger. I still like it. It's just kind of like
it's less intense now.
Yeah, I have a more nuanced idea,
measured approach.
Yeah, I don't want to just like grab Molotov cocktails. Although I'm not above it. But I need a good reason, and the movie feels good because it feels like this revenge against unjust and arbitrary authority, and it hits you just right. But I was just like, okay, that's gonna make me just want to go out and fight. So I realized that what it was doing to me was, just go out, like fight the power structure. But it's just like, I went and saw the power structure, and it's just this guy talking about like garbage can, like reclamation in on Tuesdays versus Wednesdays. I'm like, yeah, this guy needs to be fought. No, it's just like he needs to be talked to. And he like, if you disagree with his garbage sanitation, yeah.
The real world approach to it would tell you though, like, oh, that's a really neat idea and it's a good platform and I believe in it and it makes me feel something and it's entertainment. And then take that out into the real world and be like, hey, I could be a leader. You know what I mean? Like that's the type of critical analysis that's missing from people who don't see the other side of anything when you're constantly just absorbing the same material over and over, like 6 spin-offs of CSI. You're absolutely not getting any perspective whatsoever from the other side.
It's just,
and it doesn't benefit
because it's just the same story over and over again. You don't have to
like
think
hearing
or try.
about the evil terrorists and going to kill the evil terrorists constantly on Fox News tells you nothing about the drug lords who are building churches and schools. It tells you nothing about the politicians who don't have an army to fight the drug lords in Colombia. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't give you any perspective or scope of actual real world problems. And it makes you think that everything can be so oversimplified to, if I become a specialist in this one area of being a detective, special victims, I can always catch the bad guys. And there's always a bad guy. There's no nuance to it. There's no flavors or subtleties.
They were the bad guys. We were the good guys. And they made a very satisfying thump when they hit the ground.
Yeah, it's really important when consuming mature subject matter that you actually identify which parts are being sensationalized, like right from the get-go. Otherwise, like the subliminal, subtle, underlying biases that it creates and festers, it extends into your real life afterwards. And that to me is the most harmful because these people are voting based on principles and ideas that they don't understand, but they think they understand them. It's different if you know you don't understand something.
Yeah, like making an issue a moral issue when it's literally just garbage collection or something like that. Like vote for this party because we're the moral party. If you don't fall, like there's one party in Canada that does this to a massive degree. It's not the Liberals or the Conservatives. There's 2 parties actually, now that I think about it, who say that if you vote for us, it's a vote. Essentially, they're like making it a moral issue to vote for them. And it's just like, no, politics is like, you are there to govern and administrate. Administration is not a moral issue. not doing your administration properly becomes a moral issue, but I'm not
Or
voting you out of
corruption or
morality.
things like that.
Yeah, like everyone can act immoral in any sphere. It doesn't make, like, the action of voting isn't a moral issue. Well, okay, some Americans might disagree, but
But I'd like to see how, like, commercials of political things that aren't, first of all, slander. So, like, credit to the NDP for not making, like, really bad, oh, I hate this guy, look how evil he is, and the shady comments and the quotes and stuff.
In Edmonton, my NDP representative definitely.
They shouldn't. I would like to see in politics that they have, this is what we're standing for. All of their money that goes into advertising and marketing should be like, this is what we're about. Only vote for us if you believe in what we're about. Mm-hmm. Don't just vote for us because you hate the other guy more. You know, that's what abstentions are for. You go there to vote to abstain if you don't agree with any of the parties.
One thing that I thought was really weird, this is an aside and we should really move on, when watching the debate, the Bloc were the only ones with an actual platform, which was very, very strange.
Yes, and it's insane. Their platform is absolutely insane, but at least they're coherent.
Yeah, it's like, vote for me because I am actually talking about stuff, and what are you all talking about? It's like, oh man, how did that guy win the debate? Anyway.
When you haven't been in power long enough to actually be corrupt, it's easy to be able to sling mud at other people.
But yeah.
That's the benefit to be, but he's playing his cards. That's exactly what he should be doing to represent the Quebec people.
Yeah, the way they want. And when you realize that, like, why is this guy talking like this? Well, because he's Quebec for Quebec. Mm-hmm. Like he's not. Yeah, he's not being. I don't even know if he's separatist anymore, but he's definitely like, well, I'm a Quebec party. I'm going to get what I am for Quebec. This is actually surprisingly honest, and I can respect that, even if I would never vote for him federally. But but
I'm glad he's there because he's at the table and he's influencing. Like, he gets heard, so at least the side gets heard, even if you don't follow them with policy or whatever.
But we are talking,
like, you want everybody at the table.
And we're talking about this as if it's like this big issue, but when it comes down, I want to bring it back down and probably wrap up a bit soon. Is that when it's not just politics, because politics is sexy. It's this big thing. It has meaning, it has gravitas, but it's when you look at politics, the gravitas is quite frivolous.
Mostly frivolous. Yeah.
It's mostly frivolous.
Same with their spending.
Yeah. And when you come down to it, the same rules that we're talking about apply to cooking shows. I can't cook. I'm a terrible person. Well, you like watching cooking shows as an individual, right? Well, yes. Well, I don't. I actually can't stand them. But, I've met people who like them and they like watching them. But the people that I know that like them for the most part are just like, that's neat. I like watching that. And they don't think, a lot of them know why they're watching it. And a lot of them know they have what did you call that? Mature assumptions. And they know that because someone can do it better than them and has a cooking show about it doesn't mean that they're not bad cooks, or they know what's going on. The representation of cooking doesn't match up with the reality because no one has a kitchen like that. That's a TV set. And if you want,
like 4 ovens.
Yeah, it's like, right. But if you want, oh, you know what, it's really cool. You don't we're not YouTubing here because we want to be Joe Rogan or something, or we want to be
or famous. I don't want to influence people. I just want to make them think.
Yeah.
Legit. I just want more people to think more often.
Yeah, this is definitely not going to get me another job. It's like, you said some problematic things. I don't think I want to work for you, having said that. But the reality of it is that if you actually do want to cook like that, start a cooking show. Come up with a premise. Go on YouTube, put a camera in your kitchen and say, all right, today we're going to be making deviled eggs. Why not? And you can make your own representation. And this, I think, is probably going to be my last point, is that don't just be a viewer. You're not just a viewer. You're one of the few decent things to come out of the postmodern movement, and this might not even be postmodern, this might just be McLuhan again, is that, again, the medium isn't just there because it's there. The medium is there because people are engaging in it. You're part of the medium. And you need to realize again how you're in, but you're also potentially a creator. Like, we're doing this right now, and you have to digest what we're saying, but by producing, we are doing the same thing. We're engaging in representation. We're engaging in dissecting reality. And creating in itself acts as that another way of engaging with it, and can help you see those immaturities in your assumptions. And so don't think, and the assumption is that you are separate from the creation itself, and you are, other people are the ones who make Star Wars. Other people are the ones who tell stories. Other people are, no, we all tell stories constantly. And in realizing that, we have to, because that's what we are as people, we're storytellers. Like, you go and memorize a list of things on how to fix a car, but the best YouTube videos about changing your oil are pretty much a guy going like, all right, let's start changing a car. And he'll tell you a story. He'll show you, go through the story of changing the oil. And then I can act out the story of changing the oil in my car. And that's what happens. And so we learn like this, but we need to realize that we are actually engaged in the storytelling itself. And this goes for politics. This goes for hockey. You're watching the hockey game. You're cheering. They're playing because you're watching. Like, and except for reality television.
Reality TV is
those
totally
people are clones. So
I think the biggest. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go on. No, I'm just saying that's
the final point I wanted to make on that is, given that we are creatures and beings that are storytellers, and that we develop, and our personal development is predicated on storytelling too. Listening is critical. And how we receive information, and what we listen to, and how we dissect what we listen to, like the deconstructionism we talked about before with the Derrida thing. It's not just important, it's crucial to the learning process. I mean, you can memorize things that you've heard because you've heard them over and over again, and you can come up with some insane assumptions based on, similar themes that you keep seeing over and over again because you're watching the same types of shows or movies or listening to the same types of music or whatever. But to be aware of it means that you should expose yourself intentionally to alternative styles of music, even though you don't like it. Just waste some of your free time listening to country music. Just get away from the rap for a minute. You know what I mean? Or get away from the violent movies and watch a romance. Just your brain's going to wire itself to whatever you feed it constantly. And the biggest threat that we have to our own sanity and progressive development is in the way and our capacity to listen. So we should always listen more than we speak. I think that's sort of my final comment.
Yeah, I think I spoke quite a bit today.
Yeah, so, just today. In the grand scheme of things, we should be listeners, because there are more other people with more stories. You know what I mean? Than we are us with a story.
That'll keep you from getting cynical about things and writing your assumptions.
But that's how you find balance, is by not having all of your interpretations funneled through the same type of funnel. You know what I mean? Diversity of thought comes from a diversity of exposure, and sometimes you need to force that on yourself. Sometimes it's uncomfortable. Sometimes you don't like it. Just do it, because your brain's you're gonna become a type of person you don't want to be if you don't do it. So just do it.
Yeah, and I think to come back to wrap up, to come back to the very first thing, it's just TV, but you can learn and expect a doctor to act like a doctor. If it doesn't line up, well, don't get mad. Guns are difficult to use. You definitely couldn't hit anything with one, but you can learn how to, hit a bullseye every time if you want. It takes effort, but whatever. And
shout out to a couple law channels. Hogue Law has an awesome channel on entertainment, so he does law stuff on like video game industry and that type of thing. Legal Eagle does an awesome job of like copyright law and not so much criminal law, but he does a lot of stuff on copyright and what else does he do? Politics.
For me, with regard to specifically firearm law, Runkle of the Bailey goes exhaustively through firearm law in Canada, and talks about just what you are and aren't allowed to do, which probably helps a lot of people go through the Byzantine nature that is Canadian law, firearms law. If you think American firearms law is weird, well, Canadians law is Byzantine. I do not use that word lightly, and he mostly just cites case studies and stuff, but he's got a good analysis.
It's surprisingly effective.
Yeah.
So I think the biggest thing for Canada, though, is that we don't have a culture of like the same type of culture of murder that they have in other countries.
Our firearms culture is actually very mature, surprisingly. A lot of people, you go to the range and people are like,
I think that stems
education matters.
I think that stems from our general culture, though. We have a general culture that is less violent than other countries do, and other countries have more instances of gun violence because of it.
I think per capita we have about the same amount of firearms as the States. Definitely more than
not even close.
Not number, but like there's a lot of people here. Like it's not exactly a small part of our culture, but we kind of treat it as.
I think it's like orders of magnitude different. there's less than one gun per person in Canada, and there's more like 100 guns per person or 10 guns per person in the States. I think it's a huge difference.
Yeah.
Not to mention the population difference, but
I'll have to check the numbers. But I know there's a lot here, a lot more than people assume. It's a lot more than the Americans think.
We hide it well.
Yeah. Because we like hockey better. If you want violence, meet me on the rink. I'll show you violence.
Football, American football.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think I've said my piece.
So just ask why you watch something. And
and watch something different if you find yourself watching a lot of the same thing. So movies aren't reality. And we'll see you guys next week on Frivolous Gravitas, where we will be talking about something. I don't think we mysteries.
Mystery box. Anyway. All right.
Thanks for listening.
See you guys. Oh, wait, I'm recording.